The following is my conversation with Derek Bouchard Hall, the CEO of POC. Derek has an incredibly interesting background, starting in pro cycling, pro racing. He's had experiences at some incredibly important brands in the cycling industry, as well as the online marketplace Wiggle. He worked for USA Cycling for a period, as well as Assos, before moving on to take over as CEO at POC. The conversation is really interesting in a sense that we dive into his journey in the industry, but specifically his experience on positioning for premium brands with his experience as the CEO of both Assos and POC, both hugely successful brands in the industry and both known for their premium positioning. This is the Business of Cycling podcast. Derek, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you came up to me. Or really, I had been wanting to speak with you, and you actually came to me and said, "Hey, I love what you're doing," and I really appreciated that. So I'm excited to speak with you and hear more about your journey in the world of premium clothing and equipment. So this is really exciting. Before we get started, where does the podcast find you today?
I'm at POC's headquarters in Stockholm, Sweden.
Very cool. So to get started, maybe you just want to tell me a little bit about who you are, your background. I know you're an American, you're a fellow Yankee like me. Kind of where you're from and kind of your upbringing and education and whatnot.
Yeah, sure. So, and thanks for having me on. I think that your podcast plays a great role in our industry. I know that people on my team and other business I've been with, listen. I think it's really great to kind of have an opportunity to hear from various people across the industry. It's really interesting. I myself listen to a lot of your podcasts. Yeah, so I'm indeed American. I grew up around Boston. I was a ball sports kid and didn't really get into cycling until I was in university, where I was not good enough to play ball sports at the college level, and picked up cycling and was really excelled at it very quickly. And even though I was training to be an engineer, I wanted to design bridges at the same time. I was doing that through undergraduate and graduate school. I was getting more and more into racing bikes. And then when it came time to get an engineering job, I had the opportunity to race as a sort of an elite amateur with the Shackley team. For those of your listeners that knew Shackley, a great amateur/pro team of the 90s. And the idea of traveling around in a van racing across America was more exciting to me than being a structural engineer in Pittsburgh, which was my other alternative. And I ended up spending about 9 years racing bikes professionally, mostly as a domestic pro. I was a criterium racer predominantly. But then I got into track racing, joined the national team on the track, and then even spent a year on a world tour team, Mercury Viatel, in 2001. And got to the point where I was able to compete in the Olympics and do some big races like Paris-Roubaix and Ghent-Wevelgem at the tail end of my career. After I stopped that, I did not choose to go back and be a structural engineer, even though that was my academic training, because I had become interested in other things. Particularly, I met a lot of businesses in my cycling travels and saw the people that were running the teams that I was on. I kind of admired what they were doing and the opportunities they had. And it ended up it led me to business school, which is a common way for people to transition from one sort of a profession to another. And so I went to business school and then came out and had a very traditional business career post that. I was a management consultant for a number of years, but always had an interest and passion in sports and cycling, and ended up transitioning from management consulting to Wiggle, which was my first sort of working directly for a business post my business school career. And I worked for Wiggle in the UK, running their international business, which was most of their business at that time was outside of the UK. From there, I went to USA Cycling as the head of USA Cycling when they were looking to sort of pivot the organization. I kind of had a unique background in this sort of management experience, and being a member of USA Cycling for so long, both as a collegiate rider, as an amateur rider, as a professional rider, as a master's rider. And that was wonderful. From USA Cycling, I went to Assos and and was led Assos for 4 years out of Switzerland. And then from Assos, I went to POC, and I'm about 2 years into my tenure at POC. And so I've spent the majority of my professional career outside of the United States, in Europe, both in London, Switzerland, and now Stockholm. And obviously, cycling and outdoor sports have been a big theme across my career.
So you started off in cycling, and you said that you got into engineering. That was something that you chose kind of out of high school, but it sounds like after you got into it, it wasn't exactly for you, and that you did pivot to kind of something more along the lines of consulting and management and I guess we call it business. In Europe, they call it
Mhm.
economics. But it's just like the functions around management and how organizations work. So what was it that made you kind of pivot from engineering to business? Like what told you that? Because we do get a lot of people that are maybe younger in their career, and
Sure.
maybe help them give some vision around, why you went from engineering then to business.
Yeah, good question. It was a difficult journey, actually. It was a very, very difficult decision to make when I was realized that my career was coming to a close. My first inclination was to return to engineering. I actually worked a bit as a structural engineer in the early days of my cycling career when I still had, time in the winter and it wasn't really clear how long I was going to do that for. But I learned enough from that I really liked the study of engineering, but the practice seemed less compelling. The job
Sure.
of an engineer
Yeah, it's
seemed less
sounds pretty
compelling.
boring. I've never done it, but it sounds boring.
Well, I think for some people it's wonderful. I don't knock it, but I did follow the careers of some of my classmates that didn't go race bikes for 9 years, but actually built their careers in engineering and architecture. And I saw what they were doing, and it didn't seem as compelling to me. And also some of my friends that were doing it didn't really like it, which is also very influential, although many people do. There's nothing inherently wrong about it, but it seemed less compelling and exciting to me. And at the same time, I just had become interested in other things. And one of my observations I had was that, the people that were doing kind of exciting things that were really impactful were the ones that were leading organizations and building organizations. And that was interesting to me. And that kind of seemed exciting and interest to me. And as I investigated, I also kind of realized that there's a certain amount of engineering and business management. In many ways, I feel like as a CEO, I am a business engineer. I am trying to design the organization. And engineering is, there's a saying in structural engineering that structural engineering is simply doing something that anybody could do, but much cheaper and faster. Right? It's not that hard to build most of the bridges you see, but to do it at a certain cost and to do it on time, that requires a lot of thinking and planning and knowledge. And I feel the same way about running a business, is that it's not that hard to run a business if you throw a lot of resource at it. But to actually run it very efficiently, where it can be commercially successful, that your revenue exceeds your expenses, that's hard. And that's the engineering. That requires a lot of design and decision making around organizational design and application of capital. And so that's kind of what I am. I'm still an engineer. It's just I'm engineering businesses instead of bridges.
Sure. No, I agree. I've always enjoyed, being in the business side of things. It seems more dynamic. Like I said, I don't know much about engineering, but being in a business, it's almost like an organism that you're able to feed and help grow and teach and just be part of it in those kinds of ways. So, I'm with you on that regard. I mean, I wouldn't be doing this otherwise. But
Sure.
so then you went from you were in well, you went to university for economics and business, and then you got into management consulting, and you mentioned something to the like uh, to me, in a sense, that you did a traditional business path, and for you that means management consulting.
Well, it's one of the most common paths for MBAs, right? It's investment banking and management consulting is one of the most common ways to go. And yeah, I chose management consulting, and largely it's because at that time I was 34 years old and had a lot of fancy degrees, very high in education, but was low on experience. And management consulting is a profession that values capability and education over experience. And so it was a natural fit. I could get a great, well-paying, exciting job and flying business class all around the world with McKinsey, which is the firm that I joined, that I never could have gotten outside of that particular profession. And so it really was, it wasn't sort of a driving passion for me, but I recognized that it was the best sort of career opportunity before me. And having spent 9 years as a pro bike racer, really as a domestic pro and a sort of a low end world tour rider, I didn't leave with a lot of money. I
Sure.
was in an economically
Or
constrained
not.
environment. So for me, it was very practical. It was like, here's a profession that is sort of a building block to something else, meets economically is very valuable to me given where I was. And so it's a very pragmatic choice is really what it was.
And so working in management consulting, I know that it's sort of a like you're in there, you're fixing things, you're changing things, you have mandates that the that the company provides. So you're doing a lot of changes to companies. So I imagine you learn pretty quickly. And then you jumped into Wiggle, and at the time, Wiggle was a disruptor, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was for some it was the Death Star, right? Because
You
it's a
said
big
that.
evil empire.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was a McKinsey partner who was the CEO of Wiggle at the time, and he was trying to build out his management team, and that seemed exciting to me, to work for somebody who was very talented and smart. Humphrey Cobalt was his name, and so I joined in the organization, and actually didn't have any particular role at the time. He just said, "Hey, I need smart people with your capabilities. Join my team. We'll figure it out." And I ended up working at the beginning in pricing because currency was a huge issue. Wiggle exploded when the British pound devalued, making the price of Wiggle products very inexpensive outside of the UK, and that was a huge driver. For one, it was one of the Wiggle was one of the first to go online and start selling products online. They were sort of a leading in that. The
Yep.
UK was a leader in e-commerce for a range of reasons, including the fact that the Royal Mail was very dependable. There was a time where e-commerce was well, people didn't know whether to trust it. That you could actually, give them
Yeah.
your money and then they would
Yep.
ship it to you.
Yep.
And one of the ways that people trusted is they trust the mail. The Royal Mail was a trusted service, and so
Sure.
it's not really by accident that the UK was a leader in e-commerce. So they were an early adopter of e-commerce in the cycling space, and they were figuring out how to provide good service and have a range of products. And then when the British pound was devalued, it made those products very price competitive outside the UK, and the business really kind of exploded. But that didn't last entirely. The British pound started to appreciate again, and then the price advantage was eroding. And that's was my job when I joined, was what are we going to do about this? How do we deal with this currency fluctuation? How do we maintain our international business in that context? And that's what I started working on. That led to my ultimately leading the international business, which was a lot about trying to localize the proposition to all the local markets. So translating into French and as an example for France and things. And it was super cool, exciting business because at that time it really was, as you said, was a disruptor and was kind of at the leading forefront in a business enterprise, which is e-commerce and then international
Yeah, the
e-commerce.
they were the first big e-tailer dedicated to cycling, and obviously it was cycling, running, and swimming. I think it eventually, but yeah, they were a big disruptor. I know
Exactly.
that from my vantage point, they were taking advantage of economies of scale with with a direct to consumer, and the brands were kind of still on their heels in a sense that they weren't ready for that. Amazon hadn't really taken off yet, so they
Yeah.
as opposed to in the US, I know that Amazon did sort of become the Death Star for the most part for cycling, whereas direct to consumer cycling, whereas in Europe it was Wiggle. And then Wiggle, had some issues with their their ownership, and had some margin compression and problems with. But that was long after you left, which is a
Yes.
whole nother discussion. But so you then went to USA Cycling, and that was your first opportunity to have a managerial role, kind of directing the whole organization. Tell me about USA Cycling in a sense that like is it like what was the mandate there that you had I guess it would who runs USA? Is it's a government entity? Like, who? I know
It's not
nothing
a
about.
government
Okay,
entity.
it's not.
It's a nonprofit.
Okay,
There is a board
okay,
of people that come from different constituencies. It is a member. It's an NGB, a national governing body that has a range of rules that it needs to follow with the USOPC, the U.S. Olympic Committee. And it is in charge of really two things. One is managing the amateur side of the sport, so that those that want to get into the sport to experience bike racing, whether they're a master's rider or a junior or collegiate racer, somebody needs to kind of set the rules and provide insurance and some infrastructure and officiating and all of that. And USA Cycling does that so that anybody that wants to participate in the sport of bike racing, the NGB of USA Cycling plays a very important role in making that all happen. And then the other side is the elite side, which is developing elite athletes and then doing all the administration and support and coaching required to have Olympic teams and world championship teams. They select the athletes in some sports like team pursuit, track racing. They actually develop the athletes in like road racing. There's a robust professional circuit, and so they don't need to develop those athletes. The world tour teams do, but they do need to administer all of that. And so those are the two sides. And USA Cycling, when I joined, was sort of an inflection point. It's this is the post Lance era, and after Lance had gone on Oprah and had revealed that he'd been doping, it was a huge scandal for American cycling, and USA Cycling was embroiled in that. Some people felt that USA Cycling facilitated that, unfairly so, but that was sort of the perception. There was also an issue that USA Cycling had become very focused on elite athletes and was not as focused on the amateur side, and the amateurs were frustrated about that, felt like they weren't getting the right attention. And this was the beginning of the slide of the reduction in racing opportunities in the United States due to a range of reasons. But basically, races were going away, particularly road races. And so I joined to try to restore the reputation of USA Cycling with the membership, to try to get a sort of a clear break from its doping past, and to try to address this issue of a declining racing opportunities and declining membership. And I loved it. It was it'll probably be the most meaningful job to me that I ever had, because I loved bike racing. I felt like it was very, very important to support it. And I think it's very important to have a effective national governing body. That's where I really formed the view that good management has value to society and poor management hurts society. And I just tried really hard to try to make that organization to be as good as it possibly could be. And in some cases, I think it was quite successful. I do think the reputation of USA Cycling was restored, or at least put on the path to being restored with its community. I think that we made a very clear break from the doping past. That couldn't have been any more clear. But what was harder was stemming the tide of racing opportunities and declining membership. There are forces there that were just too big. But it's a great and very valuable organization. I was proud to be a part of it. I still love it. I love the work that they're doing today. Still support it.
Well, why did cycling decline in the U.S.?
Well, cycling hasn't declined in participation. So the number of people riding out there and enjoying for sport is just growing and growing. What's declined is the racing opportunities. And there's a few reasons for that. But number one is it's gotten very difficult to hold races in the United States. And this is a phenomenon that's happening across Europe as well. It's become very expensive to close roads, to have police, to deal with insurance issues and liability.
Okay.
It's made it so that if you're an event promoter, the economics just keep degrading over time.
Sure.
There is another issue of even participation. People wanting to participate in races has gone down. There was a time where it was really cool and trendy, and the Lance era helped foster that. Lance made racing really cool, and that fell a little bit. I think there's also a greater risk aversion to society over time, and bike racing is a dangerous
Sure.
sport. You're also seeing a reduction in participation in competition as a whole across a range of different sports, which is a societal phenomenon, partly driven by phone usage and things like that. So there's kind of this combination of reduced interest in racing, significantly reduced racing opportunities, and then you just have a small number of people at the very top of the pyramid of participation is reducing. The membership of USA Cycling is something on the order of 60,000. but you're talking about several million people that are cycling enthusiasts. It's a very small portion that actually want to participate in racing. And that has come down, not dramatically, but it has come down and it's been much harder.
Sure.
And
No,
I
I
didn't
get it.
realize.
Yeah, I totally get that, and I think I presume that is probably the part of what just these are just cyclical things that only there's only so much you can do, right?
Yes, yeah, that is correct. You can't change the culture. USA Cycling cannot change the culture of people in the United States, but there's things it can do to foster it, and I think it does everything it possibly can. Another phenomenon is a transition to gravel racing, which is fantastic. But gravel racing doesn't need a national governing body in the same way that the traditional bike racing does. There's no officials, for instance. You're often not closing roads, and and that's also been an adverse impact for USA Cycling, although a great impact for cycling participants overall. Yes, there's a lot of different layers and complexities to that.
And then you said you then went on and took a role at Assos, and this is kind of where
Yeah.
we get into the part of your career that where you begin tackling the premium side. And this was kind of a theme that I wanted to jump into today was to kind of discuss and dive into working with these premium brands like Assos and POC and kind of the elements of that. But when you went to Assos, can you tell us like what was the situation that you found there and what was the mandate when you came in?
I joined Assos at an interesting time in its history. It had been around for about 40 years as a privately owned business, and it was the founder started and ran it for about 20 years, and then turned it over to his son, and then ran it for about another 20 years, and then it was they ended up selling the business to a private equity firm who had taken over ownership of it. And I arrived a couple of years into that journey where they were transitioning from private ownership into private equity ownership, and they were just seeking to professionalize the organization. Of course, Assos was a incredible, iconic brand in the industry, and they had an amazing product. But as is very common in these sort of businesses that are very product led, it was not super mature as a business in other regards, whether it was marketing or supply chain, finance, accounting. And so my job was to professionalize the organization and help it continue on in its period of growth. And it was a fantastic time. It was challenging when I first started because the business had gotten into some financial challenges because a lot of investments were made to improve the business that weren't bearing any fruit yet, and it got the business into some financial challenges. So there was some cash constraints that were being faced when I first joined. But we started to get ourselves out of it, and just as COVID hit, which was an amazing run. Assos really flew during COVID. I mean, the business more than doubled during that time period. Everybody benefited, but Assos really benefited, and it was an amazing time to be there. And I really enjoyed being part of that organization and living in Switzerland and being in a business that just so loved the sport of cycling and it's such a great heritage.
So you joined in 2019, I see, and then Assos. I think up until now, I don't know how much. I presume that you guys, like everyone else, had to pivot a bit to e-com during COVID, and then, but it seems like Assos has established, has, in my opinion, and it might actually be an objective fact that they have probably one of the best distribution footprints of any cycling brand out there, at least premium cycling brands, premium clothing brand. And they now do, from what it looks like, a fair amount of business online. And so they were able to kind of balance those two. From your vantage point, as working in the business, there's always that tension between the online and the offline. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like and kind of what you've learned over the years on how to manage the channel strategy between traditional distribution network and what are some of your kind of like cardinal rules around that?
Sure, sure. And of course, it's the same case for POC now
Right, I
for us
imagine.
as well. I'm dealing with the same. When I joined Astos, there was actually a debate in the organization about whether it should be selling anything online because it had a terrific network of dealers. and it was concerned that selling online would undermine those dealers. And so there was sort of a debate. And one of the things I think I was most successful with is ending that debate and saying, no, in the modern world, we need to focus on the consumer, and the consumer wants to have a range of options to buy. We had the saying that we want to be everywhere the premium consumer wants to buy. And
That's a great
sometimes,
way to put it, right? You're giving them the options. Like you're just there where they want to be.
yes, exactly. And some people shop at the brand's website. Some people have their favorite e-tailer where they're buying their tires and tubes and also want to pick up their bib shorts, and they know how the ordering works, and it's got their payment information in it. It's super simple and easy. Some people want to go to the bike shop and try it on. And I think that it is, if you really want to serve your customers well, you want to be available everywhere they want to buy.
I'm really, really fascinated by Assos, and I was wondering if you could just give me a little more insight into like why is that brand so strong? Is it the distribution? Is it their discipline around the product and just have they been lucky at certain times? Like I don't know. From my vantage point, it seems like an incredibly healthy brand, strong brand. It's just for road cycling, like you just think black Assos bib shorts. From you living inside that brand and that company, what are those qualities that they do so well?
Well, it's a brand that was started 40 years ago. They argue that they were the first to have the Lycra bib short. Castelli, I think, also tries to make the same claim. Whatever, at the same period of time, they were both creating. So they were at the very beginning of this transition to Lycra. And the founder, the legendary Tony Meyer, he just really loved quality. He had this idea that I'm going to sell the best product. It's going to be super high quality, and people are just going to want it. They're going to have to pay for it. And that kind of oversimplifies a lot of his genius and great work. But he just had the simple view. He wanted to make the best stuff out there,
The
and he did it.
positioning, the top end positioning was just somewhere that nobody else was playing until much later, and so he just
Yeah,
really kind of dug a
and
really
there was some good fortune in being there at the transition to Lycra. That's right. So Assos was at the transition from the wool shorts to the Lycra shorts. I mean, that was a dramatic technological improvement. And that technological improvement was so dramatic that it really got a lot of attention and positioned Assos in a very high place in the market. And they just relentlessly stuck with it, and was
they
a
have.
very product focused company for 40 years. And that just builds a legend. And this really kind of this topic you're interested in about leading a premium brand. It requires some secret sauce to get there. It's hard to engineer it, but Assos did it. They created a very nice product decade after decade by just a relentless commitment to we're going to have the best product out there. And you get good at it. You get it good at selecting the textiles and having the right form and the fitting and knowing the right vendors and quality control. You learn a lot with a great team that are relentlessly focused on it. It had very good leadership focused on this. That was its excellence. It was not, no. If you looked at the success of Assos from a commercial, economic, business perspective, it's less great because that's a different skill set of making a business be very profitable and commercially successful. But the skill set of making a great product, it was absolutely excellent at doing that, and I believe it still is today. And that was a huge challenge of mine and our the management team I was working with is as we were doing these things to make the business more commercially successful and meet the investors' aspirations, how do you keep that magic? How do you keep both the product quality high, but also the brand persona very high? That's the real challenge of leading a premium brand. And I believe that the brand has been still successful doing that.
And so you were there for it looks like 3 years, and then you went and you decided to move over to POC, which POC I know is in cycling and helmets and apparel, snow and helmets and goggles as well, but their kind of core position very high as well, premium Swedish brand, but the kind of the core principles that and maybe you can obviously you can do a better job at describing it than I can, but it is safety focused, right? Safety as a positioning from that standpoint, premium safety equipment. Um, in addition to that, kind of when you came into POC, I guess what has been your mandate there, and how are things going?
Yeah, well, now you're talking about something I really love, which is, my current organization, POC, which is just a beautiful brand, another iconic brand in the sport, has been around for 20 years. And similarly to Assos, it had a sort of visionary founder that had a real vision around what he wanted to make. Stefan Itterborn is his name. And he had a real perspective around he wanted to create a business very focused on safety, that makes beautiful products in a Swedish tradition, and just really was relentless in nurturing and focusing on that. And it really kind of resonated with the marketplace, and they were there at a good time, which is when it started with ski helmets, not in cycling. It started in ski at a time that ski helmet adoption was really taking off. When I was a kid and I skied, I never wore a helmet, never even thought of it. And in a very short period of time, everybody was wearing ski helmets, and POC was at that forefront. So we had a little bit of tailwind in building that. But it was really focused on making products that were very, very good functionally in terms of safety. And then additionally had a real beautiful and distinctive sculptural shape to them. And they just relentlessly focused on that. Then expanded into cycling, both mountain biking and road cycling. And you do that for 2 decades with a real product focus, with a very clear perspective around what you want your brand to be. And it's very, very powerful.
Is
And
it discipline that you see? Like what is it that like what is the secret sauce here for this? I mean, I understand that POC, like one thing about POC and also Assos, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but it feels like they're really disciplined about the visual identity, positioning in the stores, but also like the product. Like it always seems like POC it has a very distinct look as well as Assos. And you're always going to see that expression. It feels like the expression is always really disciplined. Do you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. You need to have a perspective. You need one of two things. One is you just need to have like a single person who's in charge of everything, that has a vision. It can just be in their head, but they just kind of control all decisions. And then you get some sort of consistency. And you do see brands that start up like that with just one strong founder. They've got a point of view, and then it's a very sharp, clear point of view because it all goes through one person. Or you need some institutionalization of that persona. So then you need to have, sort of a brand book and rules and guidelines, and a whole bunch of people to follow. You need one of those two things. And
But this consistency is one of the fundamental pieces of
absolutely,
of a premium brand. Is that what you're saying?
absolutely, yeah. There needs to be a point of view that a brand has.
Why is this so important to premium brands?
It's so important because a customer needs some sort of signaling of what they're buying into. There are sometimes a product just kind of speaks for itself. You look at that product and you say, I like that. I don't know who manufactured it. I don't care. I don't know what the story is. I just like that product so much. But when you're talking about a premium brand in an enthusiast space, there's lots of different options. Sometimes they're kind of similar to the quick
Sure.
observer, and the brand is a huge signaler to the consumer about what they're buying into, what the quality of the product that you can't see as a consumer, like a helmet. It's hard to see all the quality that's in a helmet if you don't understand EPS and internal bridges and the polycarbonate coating. And if you don't understand those things, as most people want, it's kind of hard to know what's in that helmet. It's a bit of a black box. But if you know this brand has a reputation for a relentless focus on safety, you can trust that. The other thing is that often these enthusiast products, and certainly in the case of helmets and apparel, that you're putting it on your person. It's an assumption of identity. It's you put that helmet on your head, and it makes you look a certain way. You put on that jersey, it makes you look a certain way, and that logo says a certain something, and
About
people
you.
use that
It says
identify
something
with that
about you.
stuff. Yeah, and
It's
so you really care about what that brand is, whether now often it's subconscious, but you kind of know what it says about you by wearing it. And it's just, and I think it's confusing for a consumer if they don't, if they can't read a brand. Like, I don't know what these guys do. I don't know if my wearing this says something good about me or not.
And
I don't know if the quality is good.
in particular
That
in cycling,
consistency is a way for a consumer that does not, spend their full time studying, focusing on what products they buy. They kind of infer them in various places. It's a way for them to understand what they're getting. And that's why that consistency is so important. And without it, you leave the consumer only with evaluating the product, what they see in front of them, which is very, very difficult, particularly for something like a helmet, which is actually a complex structure.
yeah, and like I said, I mean, I'm living proof of what the messaging that Assos and the messaging that POC has done. Like, POC has always been a premium. The Swedish part of it for me, and this is totally my subjective opinion, but the Swedish part of it makes it feel a little bit more clean and crisp. I don't know if that's the word, but it does.
Exactly the word.
Yeah. Okay.
We use that word a lot. Yeah,
Okay.
Chris.
And I've seen other brands that kind of dance in that same place. I'm not going to name them, but it's like that cleanness, that crispness. It's something that's powerful that, provides it's a communication. So I guess what we're saying from from my armchair branding side of things, but that you do have to be consistent. But not only consistent, you have to be consistent, and it has to be a message that is effective. So whomever is, and you're saying that, and whomever is behind that, if it's one person, it's a little bit more effective because at least it's all going through one person. Otherwise, you have to have some sort of documentation, and then that has to be enforced. That doesn't sound
Uh,
simple to me. For
no, it isn't. It isn't
when you've
simple.
got family dynamics involved, if we're talking about smaller businesses, like this does not sound like an easy thing to pull off.
No, it isn't. And as the business grows and has multiple product lines, you then have more people involved in the process. And when you say enforced, that's a tricky one. Something I'm very careful about is trying not to get myself involved in that. It's not my expertise. We have a team of designers, many of whom have been here from day one. It is their expertise. And it's a very interesting time when you're in these meetings where we talk about the products that we want to make and then we want to bring to market and what they're going to look like and what colors we're going to offer, how they're going to be designed, how those meetings go. And as a CEO, there's certain things I want to guide for the commercial success of the business. But when it comes to a lot of design decisions and even what products we make, I really try to sit back there and let our experts do it. And if you've got a great team that have been there a long time, that live and breathe the values of the business, then there really isn't any enforcement. Just let them do what they want to do. And sometimes it's uncomfortable because
Yeah, I bet.
POC will sometimes, POC has a history of being rather provocative in its designs. And that is part of our ethos and part of our values. We simultaneously are a sort of Swedish, very Swedish business with that Swedish design aesthetic, clean and crisp. But there's also a tendency to be a little bold and unexpected. Our designers love it when they do something that kind of gets people thinking, what the heck is that? As long as it's beautiful and elegant and functionally is doing what it wants. The best example I can give is the Tempor helmet, our time trial helmet that has the kind of flayed edges to it. Looks like a mushroom head, is what it's been described at most pejoratively. And that helmet was designed in 2012. And I think it scared the heck out of the management to put out something that looked like that. And as it turns out, it's one of the best things POC has ever done. That helmet was designed 13 years ago. And it today remains, for some riders, the fastest helmet on the market because the POC engineers discovered that it wasn't just the head you were trying to fare, to try to make your head aerodynamic. You could actually use the helmet to be a fairing for your torso and push the air over your shoulders. And that's why the helmet is flayed that way. And that was driven by aerodynamic testing,
Sure.
not by a design aesthetic look. But when they saw the shape would be like that, they loved it because it was a bit wacky. They
Right.
loved, and it has just been a brilliant product. It's not, we don't sell very many of them all, but it is
Well, it's
incredible.
a hero. It's like a hero product.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those are super important. And one of the things that's important for a premium brand is to have those products that really express your values. And what's amazing is it took a decade for other helmet manufacturers to start building helmets that push air over the shoulders. And so what you're seeing now with the wacky helmet shapes you're seeing in time trialing, everyone is trying to push air over the torso. For many riders, depending on their position, that's the way to be most aerodynamic. POC did that in 2012, and we're flattered that everybody figured it out, but it took them a decade to get there.
So, and we talk about how, you as a CEO, you have to facilitate, you have to ensure that there is a clear and concise, or that there is a consistent message. You don't necessarily decide what that message is, but you just have to make sure that the message is how could we say, being cared for. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, and being cared for, across the organization, because a brand is built not just by the products that people make, but it's also the marketing that
Yeah,
you
well, yeah,
provide,
that was
the
another
channels
topic.
you sell through, the customer service that you provide. It's trying to get the entire organization to live and breathe the values that it has been founded on. And if those values are authentic and resonate with consumers, you've got a winner. And then you just got to keep it going. And then the other challenge is that society changes, culture changes, aesthetic interests change. And so the business needs to be able to adapt with those at the same time, and also deal with the growth imperative. All businesses have a growth imperative, and you can find a point where you start to run the limits of what your existing product set can meet that growth imperative. You need to expand. How do you expand? You've had some great commentary, I think, in your previous podcasts. People like Greg Shapley and Gerard Vrooman have really commented on this really well about the challenge of growing and keeping your brand. And I thought it was fascinating that somebody like Greg Shapley was talking about how you need to be really careful about sticking true to your values and kind of strategically engineer it by thinking about whether it's consistent with your values. And you have somebody like Gerard Vrooman who seems to be saying, I never think about any of that. I just do stuff that I believe in is cool. And those are like the two ways to do it: is somebody who just has an in sort of innate sense of what's great, and they just do what they're interested in. And if they have a great mind and great engineering sense, that will be successful. Or you can try to engineer it strategically, is another way to do it. Although I think it's actually the harder way to do it, but that is possible as well. I think is sort of strategically thinking about building a brand versus just letting it organically come. One is you just got to have somebody that does something amazing. The other one is trying to engineer being amazing rather than coming naturally. I think there's two ways to do it, but I found it interesting, those two sort of approaches to it.
What would you say to an entrepreneur that maybe has a brand and wants to keep their hands in the you know in the kitchen, but maybe they have to tend to other things. Like what would you say to a maybe an entrepreneur or an owner that maybe shouldn't be in there and should kind of give agency to these people, to the teams? Like how have you had to deal with that sort of thing before? Because I imagine it has to be hard for these entrepreneurs.
I think it's very hard. I got to say at both Assos and certainly at POC, I haven't had to do that, to try to think about how do you craft the brand, how do you develop your point of view, how do you get the brands were great. They were founded on great principles. They make beautiful product. POC is it's in the lifeblood of the place to have helmets that are at the forefront of safety. They just love it. We have in-house engineers and technicians that focus purely on research and R&D. That's all they do. They're not designers. They're not. They purely are researchers around safety and design. It is just so in the place that I don't work on that. My goal is to stay out of that. The
Okay.
brand is set. So actually, if I were in a position as an entrepreneur that I was trying to craft and develop a brand, I'm not sure what I would do. What I've loved is being that have already done that. Somebody more clever and more talented has already done that.
Yeah.
And I am here engineering the commercial business around that incredible point of view. But I do think the understanding that being different with a point of view that consumers can understand is really important. Understanding that alone is really important.
Yeah.
Having a nice product is good, but that's necessary, but not sufficient to really run a successful business and brand. There's got to be something special and compelling, particularly when you're in the enthusiast sport space. We in the cycling space and skiers, these are people that do their sport for fun and passion, and it becomes a little bit of a self-identity, some more than others, but you consider
Yeah.
yourself, I am a cyclist, I
Yeah.
am a skier.
Yep.
It becomes part of your identity. And when it becomes part of your identity, you start selecting things, whether consciously or typically subconsciously, that support that identity. And therefore you care about the littlest things that might seem, big to you, little to somebody else. It's a matter of perspective, but you care about small performance differences, which athletes they're sponsoring, what sort of aspects they focus on, whether it's design or fashion or technical.
What does that
You,
what does that product say about you? Like that's what
yeah,
people are saying. It's like they're almost in this enthusiast space, and we talked about this where it's like not only like you said, are they using this time because it's their free time, so they're going to be extremely careful about how they do it, and this is people's hard-earned money for their passion. So yeah, it's got to be perfect, and that's not easy for companies to keep up with. But that's the world we live in.
yes, yes, and the hard-earned money is a very good point, because one of the things about premium brands that really differentiates it from a luxury brand is that there isn't a complete divorce between the cost of something and the value people are getting. Luxury brands, there is a complete divorce. In fact, it's a Timex watch tells time just as well as a Rolex. There's no sort of coordination between the cost and function. The fact that it's super expensive and exclusive is part of the appeal.
Right.
Being
It's
super
a
expensive
signal.
is
Yep.
a feature, not a bug. It's a
Right.
signal. But that's not the case in products,
A
that
little
that
bit of it.
premium
it.
brands
It
sell.
can be a little bit, but not all, not
It
as
can
much.
be a little bit.
It is a little bit. It is a little bit. I would
Right?
I
So
would fair to say.
there are products that start to get to the extreme range that are real status symbols, but for the most part, there still is a connection between the performance people are getting and the
Sure.
price. It's not
Totally.
complete. There is a limit to how much people are willing to spend. They'll spend a lot more than they need to get a little bit of improvement, but it is not endless. There is still a value. There still is a calculus for most consumers of, is this worth it or not? I'm willing to pay more for something better, but there's a limit. There's still a
Sure.
value connection in our space, because the products that people are using are not fully status symbols. They do convey something, the logo means something, but they're not a status symbol in the way that a Rolex watch is. That is not the case in our sport. And
Totally.
so we always think about that is that connection to value to the consumer. Does this convey value to the consumer?
So we've got a few minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time. How are things going in 2025, Derek? I mean, you're a CEO. I know it's been a funny couple of years. I'm hearing good things, especially about clothing recently. What are you seeing?
Well, POC itself is doing great. We're growing again now in the post-COVID, and we're seeing a lot of success in the market. And so for us as a business, and for me personally, it's a heck of a lot of fun to be in that situation. In the market as a whole, I think we're recovering now. Clothing is a little bit different than bicycles,
Sure.
and road is a little bit different than mountain biking. But I would say that most businesses are back on a path of growing a little bit. And I'd say the inventory problem is still there in pockets, but
Mostly
is
for
much better.
mostly for
Um,
bikes, right? Is what you're hearing? Still a
Yes,
little bit.
I
Okay.
think there's still some, there are pockets of inventory, particularly, that I've seen it is in mountain bike because that shot up the most
Right.
during COVID and came down the most and therefore has the largest overhang. But it's getting better. That is clearly getting better. I think everybody is challenged by the tariffs in the United
Tariffs.
States.
Yeah. I
That
understand, but
is,
that's something that is sort of out of our hands.
it
I
is.
guess I was talking a little more about just overall market. I know I'm
I think it's
very,
better.
yeah, I think so. I'm hearing that. So, I
It's
don't,
better.
I don't talk much about specific market moments, but I think, at this moment, right in time, I'm hearing good things and hopefully it continues. Cycling, I know you work with private equity and I think that after COVID or during COVID, I think private equity firms thought that they, had hit the jackpot or found, the gold rush here, but the growth overall, I think is not it's not like a rocket ship in cycling. I don't think it ever will be, honestly, in a sense that the growth is typically, at least from what I'm hearing and from talking to people, the growth is consistent and obviously it's going to be something that people are continue to have interest in urbanization, but to have a really big bump in growth, you know, a la software or anything like that, like cycling, it's just not built that way, in my opinion.
No, I don't think so. On the other hand, it does have a number of factors that I think give it sort of a consistent long-term secular growth. There's a lot of positive trends in health and wellness and investment in cycling infrastructure, interest in outdoor sports, health, wellness, increased disposable income. There's a lot of positive things that give
Agree.
cycling and skiing, the other world that I'm in, a long-term positive secular growth, and that's worth something. It's less vulnerable to downturns. Now, COVID, we just saw, is a crazy situation, but I think you can count on long-term secular growth in the outdoor sports, particularly of cycling, and that's worth something.
Sure.
Now, it is unlikely to become a rocket ship, as you described. I think that is true, barring a sort of COVID example. But I got to tell you, the investors that I've seen have not come in looking at that rocket ship. What they want is good businesses that they can add value to, that if you add value to a business in a long-term secular growth, you actually can do a nice return on it. Is it going to turn into some sort of a situation where you quadruple your money? Probably not. But it actually can be a relatively reliable way to get a nice return at the same time. And so it's not a bad space for investment. It is one that's, I think lower risk and lower return versus some alternatives. And by the way, I think why you give private equity too much of a bum rap on your podcast. I think it's not intrinsically terrible. I think it matters who the private equity investors are. I've had the good fortune of working with some great private equity investors that have added value to their businesses and stability, and I think it can be positive, even if it can be negative in other cases. But I don't think it's intrinsically problematic. That's
No,
my.
I don't either. I just I've the idea of return, scheduled return is, it's difficult and it's a difficult world to be in, obviously, but that's just how it works. So
Right. So don't have investors that have a particular time frame.
right. Yeah, absolutely. But that's a
Then
family
it
office.
leads
That's not private equity.
to problems.
So anyway, but thank you so much for coming on, Derek. I appreciate you giving us some of your time, and I think people are going to love this conversation. I definitely did.
It was a pleasure, Wyatt. Thank you.
Okay, and if people want to get in touch with you, what's a good place to find you? Where's a good place to find you?
LinkedIn, it's magical. You can
Okay.
get no problem.
Okay. Take care.
Thank you.